I'm Joan Watts. I was born in Aberystwyth on the 10th of July 1928, and I lived most of my life in Aberystwyth. Went to school, and also I am now living in Aberystwyth, Glancannon Terrace. So I was very fortunate to live through the war and know what was going on at the time, the Second World War. And I'm very grateful that I lived now to my age of 92, and I've got fairly good health for my age, and I'm quite aware and I can look after myself at the moment. So hopefully I'll carry on for another year or two. I've got good genes. My dad was 96 and my mum was 94. My grandmother was 94 on my father's side. So there is long genes in the family. That's me as a little girl. I was roughly about 2 years old in my grandmother's garden, looking very sorry for myself. And my grandmother, we were very lucky because my grandmother lived opposite us when we were little and was a second mother to us, in fact. And if we hurt ourselves in falling, we always run to my grandmother to do the repairs that was needed with the blood run, etc. She was, I think, about 65 when she died. And then my grandfather lived on in the house until he was 88. But one of his daughters went there to live, to look after him at the time. He was semi-crippled through working in underground in water, and he was struck with rheumatics, etc. That was my grandfather, and he lived till he was 88, and that's the one on my mother's side. I mean, my grandfather was quite a nice-looking chap, and my mother was quite nice-looking when they were younger. And he originally came from Swansea, but he moved up to Aberdeen with quite a few of his brothers and a sister, and lived in Aberdeen because of the collieries were giving them work. And he was very jovial and a little bit on the strict side, but my grandmother was the boss. So that's my grandmother and my grandfather and their son Clifford, and that's his daughter Shirley, who became a doctor. And she lived till she was 80 years old. So there seemed to be good genes both sides of the family, which we are very fortunate. That's my cousin with the dog. He volunteered for the Air Force during the Second World War. And the boy that's standing behind him is a friend they were serving in the same plane in the Air Force, and he came down on leave with my cousin, but unfortunately the plane crashed and they are now buried in France. Well, funnily enough, the photo of my cousin in the Air Force there, he was illegitimate, he was. My mother's older sister had him, and he was, well, when he was born in the house, my grandmother's house, they said to my grandmother, you know, you can forget about him, sort of thing. But he was good with music, yeah, and he was good with art, And when Mary went to the same school as him, his drawings were still up in the art room. And during the war, before he joined the Air Force, he volunteered for the Air Force. Before that then, he used to play the violin, and this teacher, professor that used to come round the school teaching you the violin and things like that, and she used to take him and around with her when she used to perform concerts for the troops. And that the little boy is my brother, Norman, and who unfortunately passed away when he was just over 80 years old. And that's my aunt then at the back, the younger one, my mother's youngest sister. Well, my grandmother was very, very a good cook and a good dressmaker. And as I said earlier, she always saw to our cuts and bruises when we were little. And my grandfather, as I said, would sit there and give his orders, which my grandmother ignored. That's my grandmother and her sister and her husband. They had a family of 7 boys, I think it was 7, and one of the boys played rugby for Wales. One of their sons then came with his mum and dad to Aberdare and teasing me. He was older than me, but he was teasing me, and he had a little bottle in his hand, and he said to me, "Smell this perfume." But it wasn't perfume, it was smelling salts that he shoved up my nose. And you can imagine he was told off about that. So... Well, my grandfather is the one in a moustache, and he came down to Wales to work years ago when he was an apprentice to a local builder and who lived in the area of Oxfordshire. He came, when he finished his apprenticeship, the local builder dismissed him and his friend, and they came down to Wales. At the time, he landed up in the Rhondda Valley, building the little colliery houses. And eventually, he married my grandmother, who was also from the Oxford area. When they got married, they moved over to Aberdare, and that's where they brought all their children up. And my grandmother went back in her older days, back up to Witney in Oxfordshire, because her daughters had all moved up to most of her daughters had moved up to that area for work as maids, etc., in different bigger houses. That's my dad's and his mum with her children, and that was taken up in Oxfordshire. I don't know her age there, but she was getting quite a good age. And unfortunately, two daughters had passed away before this photo was taken. So she had quite a big family. But they used to come down to visit her when she lived in Aberdare. But then when she moved back to Witney, she only came to visit the daughters in Aberdare and my dad. But she had quite a good life, really. She was a cook in one of the big houses in Witney, and I think she worked for the Witney blanket people. So she done well in those days to travel to Aberdeen to get married. And as far as I know, she got married in Merthyr Registry Office. My aunt in a dark suit was Annie May, who lived till 97. And her sister then was my Auntie Flo. Sorry, my Auntie Edie. Then my father is behind her. My grandmother in the front. Then my father's brother at the back. And then my Auntie Flo then was the oldest of my grandmother's children. And my Auntie Eva then was one of twins. But unfortunately, one of the twins, the other twin died as a baby. Well, my Auntie Annie May lived till she was 97, and the other one on the end then, she lived till she was 98. So... That's a family photo of my grandmother, my father's mum's 90th birthday. And with my aunts and uncles there, the family gathering. I can remember them all, because they, as I said, some lived local, and then we used to see the ones that lived away. That's my dad there in the dark suit, and that's my uncle Will, he was older than my father, and my grandmother's there in the middle. Up in Whitney, this was taken up in Oxfordshire. And my uncle, by the bottle of wine, or whatever it was a keen amateur actor. He used to take part in local operas and pantomimes at the Christmas time. I went to Blangwawr School. I'm the one in the middle with the blazer on. And I can remember the teacher, Miss Llewellyn, her name was. And funnily enough, she taught me, I can always remember, a song. Well, I mean, she taught me more than a what's called. And when Kate was little, I sang it to her. And a couple of years ago, before Kate got married, I think it was, she brought me home one day from Swansea. And she said, and it was autumn time, and she said, which I thought was very nice, she said, Nanny, I always remember the little song that you taught me about the autumn leaves. So we sang it together in the car, and it was, come little leaves, said the wind one day, come over the meadows with me and play. Put on your dresses of red and gold, for summer is gone and the days grown cold. Soon as the leaves heard the wind's loud call, down they came fluttering one and all. Over the meadows they danced and flew, singing a sweet little song they knew, and that referred to the rustling of the leaves. And I can always remember that, and it was nice that Kate remembered it as well. So, as I said, I was in school during the Second World War, and even though we had a few bombs dropped in the locality, there were a few people injured one night. They were killed, but normally the Swansea area and the Cardiff area had more bombs drops than what we did locally. I think they were after the collieries or something. So, well, as everybody knows, there was rationing during the war, and if anybody heard there was bananas in a fruit shop, everybody would go and queue and be lucky to get 2 bananas every 3 months. And then we used to queue then for a local baker every Saturday morning. They used to make cakes, and beautiful cakes, Paris butterful cakes they were. And everybody used to go and queue to get cakes, which you couldn't get in the shops. But then after the war then finished, the food was still rationed for a couple of years. So it's an experience, I suppose, to go through that time. When I was in the grammar school, we had to write an essay on digging for victory. And I did this essay. Well, I knew the routine of the gardens, you know, planting and whatever, because my grandfather in Aberystwyth had an allotment, and my father had an allotment. And I wrote this, did this essay, and when the teacher came back now after, it was one of the term exams, and I can always remember her, Miss Barnes she was, and she said, oh, yes, and I've had a lovely surprise today. We have got one outstanding essay here, and unfortunately, I can't give 10 out of 10. Well, I never did give 10 out of 10. And so I was looking around like this now. I thought, oh, I wonder who's, because I was in the front row in school, in the desk. And so she said, and yes, she said, there's no need for you to look around, because you are the one that wrote the best essay on digging for victory. So, as I say, I liked school. I think I would have liked, if I had the opportunity, which I didn't have, was to go to college in those days and teach, say, Caleb's age, you know, with little ones. And but of course I never did go, and at that time you couldn't go nursing, which I wouldn't have minded doing, until you were about 17. Well, at the time my mother wanted the money, and you know, we were all growing up. That's my mum and dad, and my sister Vida and myself. I'm not sure where that was taken. It could have been up the Brecon Beacons, because the chapel that my father belonged to had a big tent, and in the summer we used to go up. They used to take the tent up and have weekends up on the Beacons. So I think that's where that was taken. Well, as I say, my mum unfortunately didn't have good health all her life, but she did live 94, but the last 5 years of her life she had dementia and was in a homes, which we used to visit regularly, my sisters and myself. We used to visit, and she eventually passed away peacefully, which my father did. Well, I can remember my father and mother taking us to the seaside, to Barry Island, and I can also remember that when the first time that the collieries had their week's holiday, a friend of my dad's, who was a local milkman, took us camping down to the Gower Coast for a week's holiday, and my dad borrowed the big marquee tent from the chapel that he was attending, and that was a great thing in those days to go for holiday. every holiday weekend, my dad would take us out, our mother, up the park and have games. And my dad then, once the autumn came, would go round picking apples and blackberries and taking us with him. And I said, I can remember going with him once, picking blackberries, and I wandered off, and I couldn't find him, and I started crying. But eventually, luckily, he did find me. But yes, money was short in those days, but I think we appreciated all that we had. And the dress that I got on there, my grandmother on my father's side knitted it for me in what they used to have was like a rainbow silk thread, wool. It wasn't wool, it was a silk. And she knitted that dress for me. I can remember that. At my age, you forget quite a lot of things that happened, and it's surprising what you do remember. When we were little, the house that we lived in at one time, only for a short while, had a little brook running behind it. And every time it rained, it would flood. The house would flood. And my dad used to lift us down the stairs onto the table before the water drained out from the front door. And we used to play in the brook and paddle with our other children that lived next door and in the same street. So overall, we can look back, you know, on many happy times. My sister Vida moved up to London, Forest Hill area to work and live when she married her husband, Glyn, who came from Risca, which is in the Newport area. And my dad worked in the collieries from when he was a young boy. And he was a keen gardener, a keen chapel goer, and he used to give sermons in chapel, and when he hurt himself underground, he had a job with the local council as a dustman. He was a driver with the dustbins lorries, and he worked then for a while on that job, and eventually he went then as a sewerman, tracing leaks in the area of Aberdeen, Aberystwyth. Eventually he went to live the last 2 years of his life. He went and moved to his chapel's residential home in the Mumbles in Swansea. And he had a very good life there, and he wouldn't stay with one of us. He didn't want to give us trouble. So the Christadelphian homes, he was a member of the Christadelphian Church, and they had this retirement home in Mumbles, and he spent the last 2 years of his life there, and he was very happy there. I can remember going to one of the neighbours who had a son, his birthday, and we had, she wasn't a very clean lady, but where they lived, the house had a basement. But in her upstairs parlour, as they called the main room, she had this birthday party. We were quite a few youngsters, and she had a beautiful, I can remember, a red chenille, I think they called it, cloth with a fringe all around and a nice clean tablecloth on and this big trifle in the middle. And I can always remember having a dish of trifle, and I was sick all over her chenille posh tablecloth. And from there on, I never liked trifle. And even when I got married and had my 2 children, I very, very rarely made a trifle. Thus myself, I must be about 5-year-old, I would think, and my younger sister, Vida. Because I was the eldest of 6 children. My mum had 2 girls, 2 boys, but the first boy died as a baby, and the second boy then, he moved away, went to university, had a professorship, and he eventually moved away up to Leicester, and he worked for a long time with Dunlops, for Dunlops, and my other 2 younger sisters then, one of them passed away young. She was, I think she was about 80 when she passed away. But my other sister then, the youngest, who was the youngest but one, is still alive, and she lives up in Bedfordshire, and she was a nurse and became a sister in the Lister Hospital in Stevenage, and she's still alive and doing well health-wise. She's 87. So as you can see, we're all long livers. That's Mary there with Janet as a baby, and we always were very close, and we are still very, very close. And her daughter, Helen, and her son always spent Christmas with me, or we all went up to her for Christmas. And we went on holidays together. We've been quite a lot of places on holiday. And we are still good friends. We'd all go camping together. We bought tents and used to go to France and different places for holidays. Channel Islands, Jersey, Guernsey. We did quite a lot then all together. But of course the grandchildren came along then quietly and, or gradually rather than quietly. And things altered a little bit, but we're still all very, very close. And then I passed what they used to call the scholarship and went to Aberdare Grammar School. I left there and at 16 years old, and I went to work in the Werver Colliery offices as a colliery clerk, doing wages. Oh, that's me when I was about 16 years old. As I say, I just left school and started work. So I hadn't met my husband then, but he worked in the colliery where I was a clerk. And when we did get together friendly, as they used to say years ago, courting, the boys used to make fun of him as we passed in the window where I was working, where I used to sit when I was doing my wages. And they used to shout, "Ooh!" and pull his hat off, his cap off and all that, you know. So we had quite a nice time, yes. We weren't sorry that he came out to the collieries, because just after we met, they nationalised the collieries, and they closed where I work because it wasn't. It was a drift, which I did go in and walk around with the manager and one of the other girl clerks. And I was transferred then to the, because this drift was a private one. Well, when they nationalised then, I went to one of the big collieries local that were the Powell Dyffryn in those days. So eventually then I got married. That's me, my first marriage. And my dad and my sister Vida. I'm slightly taller, with it, whether it was my hat, but and I had a bigger shoulder spray than my sister. I got married in Pontypridd Registry Office in 1947. Yeah. Well, I think it's 47 or 48, I'm not sure. We couldn't afford a big wedding like they have today. We never had the money. When I was only earning 15 shillings a week in old money as a wages clerk. So, yes. We went for a meal after the wedding, locally, in a restaurant, which was very posh in those days. Things work out, and I used to be paying out on a Friday, and the boys used to know that we were married, and they'd say, "Oh, look at her, she's passing him the pay now with one hand, and she'll be grabbing it with the other when they go home." They used to look at her now, you know. They used to pull my leg a bit, you know, and no, we used to have. I had quite a few good friends in those days. And eventually, of course, like when you get to 18 and 19, then you were getting married and people drifted and went away for different jobs, working and whatnot. So you do lose contact with your friends. Well, then when I became a widow, then I wasn't able to go out because I had the baby, to meet up. But I said I used to try and keep in touch with one or two of them. But gradually we drifted apart. I did move then to London to get him out to the colliery because he worked in the mines. And we had a job in London, in Lord Derby's London house, Stratford Place, West 1. And eventually I had my first daughter then in 1950. And she was born in Paddington, in St Mary's Hospital, Paddington, London. So I had my first daughter there, but unfortunately my husband was taken ill and passed away. So I came back home to Aberdare, and at that time then I lived with my mother-in-law, who lived in a council house but shouldn't take lodgers, etc. And then, as I say, I was very lucky that my sister Mary was going with my now next door neighbour's son, who was Norman, and his mum invited me and Janet down there for tea one day, and we were discussing the point that I was looking for rooms because, as I mentioned earlier, up in my mother-in-law had a council house and you weren't allowed lodgers, as they say. So she said then she'd have a word with her next door neighbour, which is my house now, and see if they would like a housekeeper. And this is how I came to live in Glancanan Terrace. And eventually then, there was a son and his father here. And eventually the son, who was Arthur, asked me to go out with him, which I did. And as it happened, my sister Mary then was nursing in Reedlava Hospital in Pontypridd Way. And she was home and used to stay here on her days off. So she babysat for me to go out. And then, as I said, I told my mother-in-law that I had been out with him. And she told me if I could make a little home here, to do it. So I was above board with her, and she was all right with me about me getting married again, which I did. That's my oldest daughter, Janet, as a 6-month-old baby. Quite chubby. She was quite a good baby until it came to bedtime. And then she never liked going to bed. She never did when she got a bit older, because she threatened once to report me to the RSPCC because I used to send her to bed when she was awake and wake me when she was sleeping in the morning. So I was cruel, according to her, by doing that. But there you are, we've got over it, and we're still friends. So, and she was 10 months old when my first husband, when our dad, our biological dad, passed away. Oh, that's Janet as a baby when I lived in Lord Derby's London house, and that's Janet's cousin Randall, who also lived there with his mum and dad. She is a little bit like me, because she doesn't open out an awful lot, but her dad was the same. He was, I'm not saying he was quiet, but a little bit reserved. And I think I'm a little bit like that with some people. You know, it all depends. But I'm not so forthcoming then as Mary is, or Vida. I know that things were, well, where I was lucky, I had such a good mother-in-law, and she made me very welcome, always. And the family were, you know, and even when I did get married a second time, everybody on my first husband's side were all very, very friendly about it. There was no hard feelings about it, you know. That's Janet. She had that new doll for Christmas and a cowboy outfit. She was a very contented child, really, overall, when she was little. And she was quite bright, you know. I mean, she wasn't backward then, you know, or slow on the uptake. And she always went to school, never complained. The only thing she didn't like was one of the neighbours had a dog. And she never liked going to school if the dog was out, because she had to pass the dog. And she was a bit scared of him. So she'd run back then for Susan to take her past the dog, because Susan wasn't afraid of the dog. As I say, she met her husband when her and her friend Christine, who is now my neighbour, and they used to go to the discos, the go-go's they called it years ago, and that's where she met her husband Norman, who came over from the Rhondda Valley, from Ferndale. And that's me in the start, and there's Norman, Janet's husband, and Janet behind. Norman was quite thin in those days. They were quite young as well. And as I say, eventually then they got married and had a nice wedding then, and they bought this house up in Pentook, which at that time came under Rhondda Cynon-Taf, I think they did, didn't it? So, yes, they started their family then after a couple of years. So things work out. And, of course, eventually then I had my second daughter, Susan. That's me and Janet and Susan on my 50th wedding. And we only had a little party, just family, and we went out for a little drink, and that's Susan and Janet. Janet with a perm in her hair. Which she had quite a good head of hair, but Susan have always had a thin head of hair. Still, they are friends, that's one thing, as well as sisters. When Janet started working, she had a nice job in the college down in Treforest, and eventually Sue used to go down in the school holidays and had a couple of weeks' work there, but Susan wanted to go nursing. So she went down to Reedlava Hospital and trained there, and eventually then moved down to Swansea with all our friends who were nursing together, and was nursing then in Singleton Hospital, and eventually met her husband Dave, who was also nursing at the time, and that's Susan's wedding, and Janet, and of course Sue's husband Dave, and that's his brother Paul, who sadly passed away quite young a few years ago, and that's Helen, my sister Mary's little girl, and of course she's grown up now. After all, it's been about 46 years since she was in that wedding, because Janet have just had her 50th wedding anniversary. So time goes on, but they're still all friendly and they haven't altered all that much, except that Helen have grown quite a tall girl. And there they are there, and, all in their wedding regalia. And that's my mum and dad with Susan and Dave. And as I say, all the family gathers together years ago, which they don't do so much now, because most of the brides now get their friends rather than their old aunts and uncles, who they never see, only about twice a year. They bought a flat. Well, they had a council flat allocated. They were lucky, first of all, because they had it as a priority because they were nursing. And eventually they bought their first house, and they had three children came along, and their children now are, one of them have got two children, a boy and a girl, but Kate have got no children. That's the oldest daughter of Susan. She got married to a nice boy who's divorced but had a daughter. So she's got a stepdaughter. And then the middle child was a boy, Peter. and he's married now, and they living in the Newport area. They've got no children as yet. And Joe, then, the youngest, has got the 2 children. The Morgan, who's 11, and Mason, who's 6. So we're a very close family, and everybody gets on well with each other. And I'm very proud of what they've all achieved. And there's not one of them rather, has brought any trouble home to their parents and grandparents, etc. And even the youngsters now, my great-grandchildren, are doing very well in school. I was very excited when my 2 first grandchildren were born on the same day. One was a boy and one was a girl. The girl came first and the boy came next. But even though they weren't twins, they were second cousins, but they were both born on the same day. What I'm very pleased with as well is the memories that my grandchildren got of their grandfather, and how we used to take them out walking and teach them different things. And with Owen and his grandpa, they'd be up in the shed knocking up bits of wood and making different signs and sticking them in the garden to keep the cats away. And I said, it is nice that they remember all these little things. They got good memories, you know, and how they used to enjoy coming up to stay with me and their grandpa when they were little, till they got too many to stay all together. I think that's my niece's wedding. Linda, she was in the Air Force after the war, because she's young. Well, she's the same age as Susan. And she met a boy while she was in the Air Force from Gloucester. And eventually they got married. And that's me and Arthur outside the church when Helen got married, I think that was. The time goes, you forget which one you attended. But we had a good weekend then. Well, we were up in Bedford then at the time, because that's outside the local church. That's Arthur then, that's our Ruby wedding. We were down in Janet's and for that occasion, and had a weekend with her, and then Sue and Dave came, and the rest of the family were there. So I'm not going to kill him with that knife, we're just going to cut the cake. So we had quite a nice time there that weekend, and Sue was there with her grandchildren and everything, and it was, everything went well. So there's another occasion when we're, I think, on holiday, and drinking and eating as per usual. There's not many photos that we're not eating and drinking on, but we were very fortunate to be able to go on holidays every year. And then when Arthur retired, we went more often and for longer periods. So we had nice memories to look back on when we couldn't go, and when I couldn't go as well with him when he passed away. Because he went through all, He was called up the beginning of the Second World War, served in North Africa with the Royal Engineers, and he was very fortunate, as he said. He got back home at the end of the war, but he was abroad for quite a good couple of years, and he always said that he had a lucky war, because he was a quartermaster sergeant when he finished, so he wasn't on the fighting line. So that's how he considered himself lucky. There you are. He had made quite a few friends who, even after the war, he kept in touch with. And then 1 year then after he'd retired, we went over to Tel Aviv and visited some of his old haunts and the cemetery where a few of his friends were buried, which was quite an experience to see how young, in the war cemetery, how well kept it was, but how young a lot of the boys that were buried there were. So that was quite homesick in a way for him, and we sat on the wall having a little bit of lunch. We had taken a picnic with us, and a lady came along and started talking to us, and she can remember, she lived in this avenue during the war, and Arthur was telling her then that he was billeted in the little schoolhouse opposite where we were sitting, and she was quite thrilled to talk to us, and she was very pleased and said, "You've made my day now reminiscing." So we had quite a good holiday that time, more or less reminiscing about the war and things. I think myself, if you treat others tidily, with a bit of respect, they'll respect you. But on the other hand, you get some people that can take advantage of you. And it comes a time in life then where you've got to learn, if you're that way inclined to do kindnesses for people, you've got to learn to say no, because I found that people will take advantage of you. Did you ever see the poem that I wrote? When I was in school, I would have liked to have been writing short stories for children, you know. I was good in English, and I wrote a poem. Susan copied it when she was in the grammar school and pretended that she had written it. So a couple of years ago then, Mary in the church, they were short of stuff for the church magazine. So I said, oh, I got a poem I'll give you, I said. So it was in the church magazine. My filing system isn't very good, as you can see. All right? Who can express the joy of spring, a new beginning to everything? Trees are bursting into life, a perfect end to winter's strife. Birds are busy with their nesting, lambs are frolicking and jesting. Mother Nature paints the flowers, and in April come the showers. Then we see the coloured rainbow setting all the sky aglow. When the summer sun is bright, filling hearts with pure delight. Who gives thought to winter's gales as we picnic in the vales? When the trees are autumn painted, brown and gold the leaves are tainted. Then the leaves begin to fall, telling us of winter's call. And one morning when we wake, snow is falling flake by flake. Soon the earth is covered white. Oh, it is a pretty sight. When you think of all the beauty, God has surely done his duty. Think it's nice? Yeah.
Back in school.
I did that when I was in school, yeah.
Kept it all that time.
Yeah. It's, I got, there should be an old one here of it, that I copied it out a bit tidier. Yes. Oh, I'm not as dull as I look, cabbage looking. I would have liked to have written children's short stories, you know, because I can remember doing a nice one about a Christmas tree, or where I was planted in the forest, and they came and, when I grew up, they came and cut me down, and I was transported like on a lorry, and got to the got to a depot or somewhere, and had somebody bought me, took me home and decorated me all up with tinsel and baubles, you know. I made quite a good story about that, and I done a few, but I haven't kept them. I mean, it's done it for a hobby at one time, and yes, there you are. I can't think of anything else, so